Toyota is one of the most important car makers in the world, and today we're looking at one of their most important models with this, the 2021 Toyota Corolla. Now they've been perfecting this recipe for many decades, so this one is set to be pretty good. I'm going to give you a full tour around it, we're going to take it out for a spin, but first I want to make sure you guys like the video and subscribe to the channel. Alright, so now we're behind the wheel of the 2021 Toyota Corolla, and let's start with one of the most important things, that being the engine, because this one actually already has an upgraded engine, because the standard car gets a 1.8 liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder developing around 130 horsepower, but this one has the 2 liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder developing 169 horsepower and 151 pound-feet of torque. Now, while that does not sound like a lot, because, well, it frankly isn't, you have to keep in mind that the Corolla weighs around 3,000 pounds, and in some configurations, it can actually come in under 3,000 pounds. So once you factor in the weight and the power, it's not as bad as the original power figure might seem. Now, the Corolla does not offer all-wheel drive. All of the power goes to those front wheels, and it does so via a CVT, a continuously variable transmission. And what that means is that there's no gears. This transmission is variable. And I haven't exactly loved CVTs in the past, and I don't love this one. I much prefer if they had gone with a 6-speed automatic, but we'll get to that in just a second. So let's get back to the engine, because is it enough? Is 169 horsepower enough for the Corolla? And I think it's okay. I feel like if this were the base engine, that would be perfectly fine, because most people buying Corollas aren't buying them for speed or, to drive sporty in any way. This is just a cheap commuter car that people want to get in, they want it to work, they want it to be comfortable, and that's about it. In that regard, the engine is just fine. Now, let me give you an example of how that performance comes about, because this engine develops all of its power at the high end of the rev range, which means that in situations like what we're driving in now, there's not enough low-end torque to really make the Corolla feel kind of quick or agile in any way. I'll demonstrate. So right now, if we want to overtake this truck in front of us, we can move over to this lane, and even if we floor it, it takes a while before we even catch up to the truck to try and overtake it. And that's the real issue for me, is that I feel like the power being so high up means you have to floor it. That was foot to the floor in order to get to where you're going, and as a result, overtaking on the highway, not absolutely ideal. So in this case, the actual issue isn't even the transmission, because as you guys saw, once I floored it, it actually revs all the way to where it needs to. But the problem is all the torque and all the power is high up in the rev range, which means that you're gonna have to floor it for a little while before the car fully revs up and you actually get going. But the thing is that you're gonna have to floor it if you wanna do some type of maneuver on the street. It's not exactly easy to slowly glide between overtaking or trying to speed up. It actually takes a little bit of effort. And as a result, the Corolla, it's not exactly ideal in those scenarios. But the transmission itself actually responds pretty quickly. And even the sort of fake simulated shifts when you put it in the manual mode are actually okay as well. So raw power aside, let's talk about how the Corolla drives, because I feel this chassis is actually quite capable. The Corolla feels quite fun to drive. Now, I will say there's almost no fuel coming through the steering wheel. It's not exactly, sporty in terms of speed or anything like that, but the chassis itself is actually pretty capable, and I feel this chassis could easily handle more power. It can actually, if you were to drop a turbocharged engine, for example, this chassis would do great with it. And even Toyota itself recently attempted to make a sporty Corolla with the Apex. That was supposed to be a sporty Corolla, but what they did is they stiffened the suspension, but they didn't give it any extra power, which I thought was a mistake. I feel like this chassis could easily handle more power, and it could do so very competently. Now, this particular Corolla exhibits very little body roll. It's actually very composed. I actually like it quite a lot. I'm very, very surprised. Now, I have driven the Corolla hatchback last year, and I really like that too, but that was a manual, so it's not exactly a direct comparison to this, but this one being the CVT, it's actually still pretty fun. Again, not fast, but actually very competent. Once you get it going up into speed, it actually drives pretty nice. I will say I have been able to attack corners, quite quick in this car. Now, I will say that when you really get onto it, it does turn to understeer very, very quickly, but if you don't reach that limit, you can actually carry a lot of speed, a lot of good momentum, which I like. So let's talk aesthetics, because this Corolla, being not a base model Corolla, gets an upgraded front and rear bumper. Now, I will say this is absolutely ideal if you want to get the best of the Corolla. The standard Corolla looks okay. It's not an ugly car by any means, but it's just that this one looks so much better. So the new bumper actually makes the headlights look sharper. Even though they're exactly the same you get into the standard Corolla, these, with the larger front grille, it actually looks very, very good. and I actually really dig them. And I think that if you're going to buy a Corolla, you should definitely upgrade to the one with the better aesthetics. And that's another thing, the Corolla doesn't cost very much. So while the Corolla starts just under $20,000, this one is about $26,000. So if you want to upgrade between the trim levels, it's actually not very, very expensive. Down the sides, we can see the 18-inch wheels, we can see these side skirts, and I think it all looks really nice. This Corolla looks unusually sporty. Now, previous S and SE models and things like that were attempting to be sporty, but they were never truly sporty. This one, I think, feels very nice. I actually really, really like how it looks. This SE with the upgraded aesthetics, the better engine, sunroof, things like that, it comes in at $26,000. So the difference between a base model Corolla and a pretty loaded one is actually not huge, and that's intentional, so you can move in between the trim levels without expending a lot of cash. But now that we've covered what the Corolla does well, now we're gonna have to move into one of its weaker points with the interior, because this interior, although the layout is quite nice, you can definitely feel you're in a cheap car. It definitely feels very, very, very on the sort of cheap end of the market. And that has to do mainly because a lot of the contact points that you interact with are plastic. A lot of them feel kind of just cheap. And so, for example, this dashboard, you'll notice that it has what looks almost like leather, but it's really just like this sort of rubber material, and it has a fake stitching to kind of make it look like leather. I feel like at this point, if you have to try to fake leather, I would just rather you leave it as the standard plastic that the Corolla already comes with, because this just looks a little bit, it's not ideal. I feel like I'd rather either not have it than like try to fake it. And that goes with everything else as well, because pretty much everything you touch is plastic, and it's not exactly great. But I will say this SE model, you get the sort of leather wrap, which actually isn't leather because Toyota doesn't have leather. They have what they call Softex, but this is essentially a Softex armrest, and you do have this little door card here, which is also covered in Softex. It's all, those little touches do help, but overall, the cabin itself, and keep in mind that if you do get a base model Corolla, you're gonna get these in fabric, which is only gonna lower the sort of interior quality down further. I will say though that I really do appreciate the fact that they included a quite sizable screen in here. As you can see, it's very easy to reach, it's very large, and it includes Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, and Amazon Alexa, which is an added addition, something a lot of cars don't feature just yet. Now I will say, if you are connecting to Apple CarPlay, the plug for the USB is right here. It's just sort of into the dash itself. It's not nicely integrated anywhere, it just kind of sticks out of nowhere, so you have your cable just kind of sticking up, because obviously there's no wireless CarPlay or Android Auto just yet. One of the biggest things that bothered me this whole time with the Corolla is actually its gauge cluster, because while some competitors are going into digital gauge clusters, this one is stuck with a traditional analog. There's a tiny little screen off to the right, but it doesn't display that much information. Most of the things that you're looking at are still in analog gauges, and they're not very good looking analog gauges. Not a huge fan of it. I feel like it looks a little too plain, a little too simple, but I feel like future generations of the Corolla will likely have a digital display. I really hope they do, because that would be a major plus. Something that I'm sure you can hear is the wind noise, which is actually terrible. This car is incredibly noisy on the highway. Now, you can definitely hear it through this microphone, because it has been bothering me this whole week, especially when you get up to big highways like this where there's a lot of wind rushing through. You can hear it very, very clearly, and it kind of intrudes into the cabin, and it's definitely a little annoying. I don't exactly love that. I will say, however, the seats themselves are very comfortable. They are fabric, they're not leather, they're not Softex. If you want to get that, you're gonna have to upgrade a little bit more into higher trim levels, but in this regard, very comfortable, very nice. They have a ton of good support. They're actually they're actually decently tight around the sides. They're not bolstered, heavily in any way, but I think they're actually very nice, and I think they work really well. They're supremely comfortable. I've driven this Corolla quite a bit, and I haven't found them to be uncomfortable in any way. There we have it, the 2021 Toyota Corolla. Is it perfect? No. Can it be improved? Absolutely. But if you are going to buy one, I highly suggest you get the 2-liter engine. It's much larger, much better than the standard 1.8 liter. The styling, if you can get it within your budget, I highly recommend going for it. It makes the Corolla look significantly nicer than the standard car. However, some of the build quality and refinement issues are quite significant, so keep that in mind if that's something that's important to you. But all in all, Toyota Corolla has always been a good package, and it remains so, and that's why they sell so many of them. And with that, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you again very soon.